So Ryan Garcia takes out Javier Fortuna in the sixth round, knocking him down 3 times in the process. So I've only just had a chance to watch this fight, but yeah, let's talk about it. So in the first round, unsurprisingly, you see that Garcia has quite a considerable size advantage. This fight, I only realised when I was watching it that it was actually taking place at 140 pounds, light welterweight, which is the first time that Garcia's fought with that weight division. I'm not sure if Fortuna has as well, but Fortuna is certainly the more experienced regardless of that. But from the beginning of the first round, you can see that Ryan Garcia, with his size advantage, came out taking the centre of the ring as you'd expect, and was quite busy behind the lead left hand, particularly the jab, but he was also mixing in some left hooks, and you can see that he was just trying to manipulate the guards of Fortuna just by changing the trajectory of his punches. So the jab would go down straight down the middle, whereas the left hook would come from the side, and doing all this to, as I say, manipulate the guard of the southpaw in Fortuna, but also to engage his lead hand and stop him from doing the same thing. So that was good from Ryan Garcia. He was very consistent, very busy with it, but then he also did a good job of mixing in some right hands, especially when Fortuna would look to edge forward, and he did so with good timing. Not all the punches landed. Fortuna had his gloves up in quite an appropriate position, but it was the thought process from Ryan Garcia, and he had the eye for the punches and he had the timing, which was quite impressive. To be expected of Ryan Garcia, he was quite heavy on the front foot, so he's a lead left foot, and I say that's to be expected because he is a prolific left hooker, so he's going to have the weight on that side of his stance ready to rip back at any moment, like we've seen him do on numerous occasions. So it was apparent from early on as well that not only did Ryan Garcia have the size advantage, but he also had the speed advantage too, which is, it's something that can happen, but you don't see it that often in boxing because typically the smaller man has the speed advantage. But that wasn't the case in this fight, and Ryan Garcia was able to intimidate Fortuna quite early on with his speed, and we saw more of that going into the second round, where Ryan Garcia largely had the same approach to the first round, and he showed a good ability to cut off the ring. And this is where I say the intimidation factor came in, because Javier Fortuna in this round in particular started to use a bit more of the perimeter of the ring and really keep his distance from Ryan Garcia, who, the ability to cut off the ring is one of those more subtle skills, but it can be a little bit trickier against a southpaw for an orthodox opponent because they don't often have the opportunity to practice it. But Ryan Garcia did so with some pretty good form. Javier Fortuna was attempting a couple of shots here and there, but for the most part he was just too stationary and had virtually no active guard. Hands were very static, heads were very static, and there was really Ryan Garcia. He wasn't that active himself, but he was just even more active than Javier Fortuna, which wasn't particularly difficult. So just with his lead hand and kind of edging his head forward, slipping off a little bit, he was able to really unsettle Javier Fortuna and make him look quite stationary. But I think these are still early rounds, so it doesn't give you the greatest amount of insight necessarily. But you could see that Ryan Garcia was very patient, really looking to engage his boxing brain. And this was emphasised in the corner work by Joe Goosen, who many people were a little bit sceptical of this working relationship between these two. Some people don't particularly rate Joe Goosen, but I think based on this fight and the corner work that he did for Ryan Garcia, it was quite impressive, and he emphasised that patience. Round 3 was more of the same, nothing really notable there, just more of the same that we saw in round 1 and 2. Round 4 was a significant round because this is where the first knockdown came. Ryan Garcia knocked down Javier Fortuna with the same punch that took Luke Campbell out last year, and it was that kind of Ryan Garcia comes in, he closes the distance and does a very subtle feint to the head, but instead redirects the left hand to the body and just completely folded Javier Fortuna up. He Fortuna, this is, made it to his feet, and he saw out most of the count, got up, and he's a veteran. He's quite experienced. He tried to posture his way through the rest of the round, and I guess he did survive the round, so he did a decent job. But towards the end, he was starting to get clipped a little bit more by Ryan Garcia, who probably sensed that he was there for the taking. Round 5 was where the second knockdown came, and this was actually a strange one because of the angle of the camera, you couldn't really see the punch of Garcia's that landed, but they seemed to trade left hands. Fortuna's southpaw left compared to Ryan Garcia's orthodox left, and Ryan Garcia came off better, even though it looked like Fortuna's landed. It wasn't as nearly as damaging as Garcia's left hand, and once again Fortuna hit the deck, but this time he seemed to rush to his feet, so I don't know whether the shot was not as damaging, or maybe he started to panic a little bit, because he shot up in this one and once again made it out of the round. And then round 6 we have the third knockdown, which came in the opening seconds of the round, and it was just a 1-2 and a left hook from Garcia that just floored Fortuna, and by that point he had enough. I think he was never really in this fight. All the rounds just went to Garcia. It was very much Ryan Garcia in the driving seat, and I think Fortuna he knew from early on that this was going to be a tough fight, and as soon as the punishment started coming through, he called it a day. Let's be real. He spat out his gum shield as the referee was counting, and the referee, I can't remember whether he finished the count or whether he just waved it off. I think he waved it off, and there wasn't really much of a protest from Fortuna, so that in itself says a lot. So yeah, that's the fight in its entirety, essentially. Overall, to give an assessment, I think it was a very impressive and very mature performance from Ryan Garcia, albeit against an opponent who was probably or has probably seen much better days, but nevertheless this was still supposed to be a challenge for Ryan Garcia. For those who tuned into the live stream a couple of days ago, I said that I anticipated that Ryan Garcia would stop Fortuna, but I was going for more rounds 8, 9 or 10, probably 9 or 10, so a bit later in the fight, and I anticipated that Garcia would probably be down on the scorecards, but that wasn't the case. The fight ended in round 6 and it was Garcia all the way. So yeah, I feel like this is an impressive performance from Ryan Garcia. He showed a lot of patience and a lot of poise, and that was a good, I think that's a positive thing to see, because we already know he has speed and power. That's evident, but the fact that he's able to marry it now with a bit more skill and a bit more patience, he's a young fighter, but he's taking his time. He still has the energy when he needs it. I think it's a very impressive performance, as I say. There are still some improvements to be made, of course. No fighter is perfect. On a couple of occasions, it seemed like Fortuna was able to hook over Ryan Garcia's left jab, and I think this maybe highlights how Ryan Garcia isn't always the most defensively responsible, mostly when he's in range. He does step out after his punches usually and get some distance, but you can't always rely on that, because sometimes a fighter will punch with you, especially if he feels like he has the timing down on your shots. And I feel like this weakness in particular could potentially cost him in a fight against, say, Tank Davis, who is a lot quicker of hand and foot than Fortuna. And Tank, he's displayed that kind of leaping right hook at times, and I feel like if he's going to land that shot, it could potentially come against Ryan Garcia, as Garcia attempts to get some control over the space with that left jab. Garcia, despite having some good speed and power, and obviously clearly the ability to take out his opponents, he doesn't really have puncher's mechanics. And what I mean by that is he has a very strange power punching technique where he does kind of remain on the center line and almost looks like he's slapping with his punches at times, because his body maybe lacks the mobility and the articulation to really work through his stance. And now some people may think that this is nitpicking because he's still getting knockouts, and yeah, I can understand that, but you want to maximize your technique and your power output, and it could be problematic if he opts to trade with bigger punchers like a Tank Davis, who, you know, we saw in Tank's fight against Romero that he's able to come off the center line as he's punching, which not only helps him to produce that force, but it also keeps him safe because the offense will just whiz past his head as he comes off the center line. Garcia won't necessarily have that same defensive contingency from his power punching, because yeah, he punches hard, but he stays in one place largely. So there is some refinement there, but I think for the most part this was a very good and exciting performance, not necessarily because the fight was exciting, but because it shows that Garcia is ready to step it up. You know, I was frustrated with Garcia for a while because he was inactive. You know, there was a lot of pullouts, and it just seemed like his career wasn't really going anywhere. And what made it more frustrating was the fact that Garcia clearly has ability. He's very clearly an interesting addition to whatever division, lightweight or light welterweight, he fights in. And you know, when you have guys who aren't particularly talented and they're not active, you don't really care. But when you have a fighter like Garcia who has ability, has talent, and shows that he has some degree of skill, and he could potentially be competitive with his contemporaries, you want to see this guy fight. You want to see him active. You want to see him reach his potential alongside his rivals. So it looks like he is well and truly back. Hopefully he can stay on the straight and narrow and have some regular activity. Stylistically, I'm not sure where he fits in. Do I anticipate him beating Tank Davis, Devin Haney, Lomachenko, Teofimo Lopez? I feel like I have to see more. Those guys have all been relatively busy and fighting a higher level of opposition mostly than Javier Fortuna. But nevertheless, it's still those are still interesting fights. And Garcia, I think, is definitely established himself as one of the top guys in either lightweight. Light welterweight, I think, is a bit of a different kind of task, because you do have other fighters like Josh Taylor, Jack Catterall, and Regis Prograis if he's still at 140. But nevertheless, I'm looking forward to seeing Garcia fight again, and I think he deserves some major credit for this win. So that is all for me on this fight. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.